Hello, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked today's story about Colton Clay. And if you enjoy this content, please give me a like and subscribe. Maybe leave a comment down in the comment section of something you'd like to see next or hear next. Again, thank you for watching.
The sound came in pieces. Static first, thin and brittle, like ice cracking across a frozen lake. Then a voice. Repeat. If you can hear this, stay inside. Colton Clay paused mid-swing, the axe head buried deep in a split log at his feet. The forest around him stood still, tall pines swaying gently under a pale gray sky, the kind of quiet that usually felt earned. Today, it felt wrong. The radio hadn't worked in months. It sat on a small wooden table on the porch, sun-faded and forgotten, a relic from before Colton had decided the world was too loud and too crowded for his liking. He turned slowly toward it, brow tightening, listening harder. The signal crackled again. Infected individuals, not responding, deceased, but still moving. Colton pulled the axe free with a sharp tug. The metallic scrape sounded louder than it should have. What the hell? He stepped onto the porch, boots thudding softly against the worn planks. The radio hissed and sputtered, like it was struggling just to stay alive. Then the voice came through clearer. This is an emergency broadcast. Multiple confirmed cases of violent reanimation. Victims are dying and returning. They are extremely dangerous. Avoid all contact. Colton stared at the radio. Returning? He muttered. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, whispering across the clearing. The forest had always spoken in subtle ways. Creaks, rustles, distant animal calls. But now every sound felt sharpened, loaded with meaning. Infection spreads through bites. Repeat, through bites. Do not engage. Do not attempt to help infected individuals. The signal warped, stretching the voice into something almost unrecognizable before snapping back. Secure your homes, board windows, lock all doors, stay inside. Emergency services are overwhelmed. This is not a drill. Then, silence. Only the wind again. Colton stood there for a long moment, the weight of the axe still in his hand, the words settling into him like cold water. Yeah, he said finally, exhaling. Right. But he didn't turn away. The cabin behind him was strong. He'd built most of it himself. Thick logs, reinforced beams, heavy doors. It had survived winters that buried the world in snow and storms that snapped trees like matchsticks. It could take a beating. But as Colton stepped inside, that confidence started to crack. The place was clean, simple, practical, too simple. He moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets one by one. Canned beans, 3. A half-empty box of pasta. Rice, maybe enough for a few meals. He crouched, checking lower shelves. Nothing. The fridge hummed quietly behind him, but when he opened it, the contents were just as sparse. Eggs, some leftovers, a jug of milk that wouldn't last the week. He shut it slowly. Smart, he muttered to himself. Real smart. He'd chosen isolation for a reason. No crowds, no noise, no dependence. But isolation worked both ways. No backup, no help, no stocked supplies. Colton ran a hand through his hair and turned toward the small closet by the door. He opened it, pulling out his rifle. A hunting rifle, reliable, clean, familiar. He checked the ammo. 2 boxes. That was it. Okay, he said quietly, forcing a steady breath. Okay, think. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the cabin walls like fingers testing the structure. He walked back to the porch and looked out across his land. 50 acres of forest stretched in every direction, dense, uneven, broken only by narrow trails he knew like veins beneath skin. No neighbors, no roads in sight, just distance. If what the radio said was true, that distance might be the only thing keeping him alive. By late afternoon, the cabin had started to change. Chairs dragged across the floor, tables shoved against doors, nails driven into spare planks as Colton worked methodically, boarding up windows one by one. Each hammer strike echoed through the cabin, sharp and final. He didn't rush. Rushing meant mistakes, and mistakes right now meant death. The front windows went first, thick boards crossed in tight angles. Then the side windows, smaller but just as vulnerable. He left narrow gaps, just enough to see out, not enough for anything to get in. By the time he finished, the light outside had dimmed into a cold, fading gray. The forest beyond the boards looked different now, framed, distant, like something he was no longer part of. Colton stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. His arms ached, his hands raw from the work. "Not bad," he said under his breath. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't enough. Night came fast, the kind of night that swallowed everything whole. Colton killed the lights inside the cabin, leaving only a small lantern glowing faintly on the table. Shadows stretched across the walls, shifting with every flicker of the flame. He sat in a chair near the front window, rifle resting across his lap, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the wind threading through the trees, the distant creak of branches rubbing together. Normal sounds, comforting even. Then, something else, faint, far away. A scream. Colton's head snapped up. It didn't last long, cut off suddenly like a switch flipped. Silence rushed back in, his grip tightened on the rifle. "That's miles out," he whispered. Had to be. Sound carried strange in the woods. Still, he leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the dark sliver between the boards covering the window. Another sound came. Not a scream this time. A low, uneven noise, dragging, moving, closer. Colton stood slowly, every muscle tightening. "Probably a deer," he said quietly, more to convince himself than anything else. But deer didn't move like that, didn't sound like that. The noise grew louder. Step, drag, step, drag. Something emerged at the edge of the tree line. At first, it was just a shape, darker than the darkness around it. Then it stepped into the faint moonlight. A person, or what used to be one. Colton's breath caught. The figure's clothes hung loose and torn, stained dark. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, jerking slightly as it moved. One arm dangled uselessly at its side, but it was walking. No, not walking, lurching toward the cabin. Jesus! Colton raised the rifle slowly, lining up the sights through the narrow gap in the boards. The thing stopped, its head lifted. And even from that distance, Colton could see its eyes. Empty. Then it moved again, faster, not a full run, but not slow either, purposeful, direct. It hit the clearing and kept coming. Colton's heart pounded against his ribs. "Stay back," he whispered, though he knew it couldn't hear him. The thing reached the edge of the porch. Step, drag, step. It climbed the steps awkwardly, one foot slipping slightly before catching. Up close, it was worse. Skin gray and tight, lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. Its jaw hung slightly open. Breathing. No, not breathing, just existing. It reached the door and stopped. For a moment, everything froze. Then, it slammed its head against the wood. Once, twice, hard. The sound echoed through the cabin. Colton flinched, finger tightening on the trigger. "Stop," he said under his breath. The thing hit the door again, and again. Wood groaned slightly under the impact, not breaking, but testing, learning. Colton took a breath, steady, controlled. He aimed and fired. The shot exploded through the night, deafening in the enclosed space. The figure jerked violently, then collapsed. Silence followed. Heavy, absolute. Colton didn't move, didn't lower the rifle. Minutes passed, nothing else came, but sleep didn't come either. Morning arrived pale and cold. The body was still there, lying twisted at the base of the porch steps. Colton stared at it through the boards, jaw tight. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, it's real." The radio hadn't been lying, and if one had made it this far, more would. He turned away, mind already shifting, calculating. He needed supplies, food, water, medical gear, ammo, all the things he'd ignored, all the things that mattered now. Colton grabbed a map and spread it across the table. The nearest town sat 12 miles out. Small, quiet, but it had what he needed, if anything was left. He looked back toward the door, toward the body outside, then back to the map. "Get in," he said, "get out." Simple. It had to be. Because next time, there wouldn't be just one, and the forest wouldn't stay quiet. Morning didn't feel like morning anymore. It was light outside, yes. Pale sunlight spilled across the clearing in thin, cold strips, sliding through the pines and catching on the frost-silvered grass. But the day had none of the ordinary comfort it once carried. No sense of routine, no slow beginning, no peace, just aftermath. Colton Clay stood behind the boarded front window with a mug of black coffee cooling untouched in his hand, staring through the narrow viewing gap at the body crumpled below the porch. The thing looked smaller in daylight, less like a nightmare, more like a fact. A man in a torn flannel jacket lay face up near the steps, one boot twisted beneath him, one arm bent wrong at the elbow. Dark blood had dried around the head and soaked into the dirt. A hunting cap lay several feet away, half caught in the grass. A normal scene if you didn't look too closely, if you didn't remember it had walked, if you didn't remember the way it threw itself against the door like it knew there was life on the other side. Colton took a sip of coffee and grimaced. It had gone bitter and cold. He set the mug down and reached for the rifle on the table. He checked the chamber, then the remaining rounds in the box beside it. Every movement was careful, economical. He wasn't panicking, not outwardly, but underneath, something had changed. The night had peeled away whatever distance had existed between the words on the radio and the reality outside his cabin. This wasn't happening somewhere else. It wasn't locked to a city or isolated to some distant, unlucky place on a map. It was here, on his land, at his door. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and opened the front door slowly, letting the cold air spill into the cabin. It carried pine, damp earth, and the faint metallic smell of blood. The body didn't move. Still, Colton approached with the caution of a man stepping toward a bear trap he couldn't see. He circled wide first, boots crunching lightly over the gravel and dead grass. The man's face had gone waxy and hollow, mid-50s maybe, deep lines at the mouth, beard gone mostly gray. One eye was open and glassy, staring past the trees at nothing. The bullet had entered high on the forehead. Colton stared down for a long moment. "Sorry," he said, and meant it. Then he crouched and searched the pockets. Truck keys, a wallet, a folding knife, no gun, no extra ammo, no supplies worth taking. Colton stood again and looked out toward the tree line, half expecting movement between the trunks. There was none. Just the wind shifting through the branches overhead, making the pines sway and whisper to one another. He dragged the body to the edge of the clearing, farther from the house, and covered it with an old tarp from the shed. He didn't know why. Dignity, maybe. or superstition. Or maybe he just didn't want to keep seeing it every time he looked out the front window. When he finished, he stood at the open shed doors and took inventory. A chainsaw with half a tank of gas, fuel cans, a hatchet, 2 coils of rope, a pry bar, a heavy splitting maul, a toolbox full of hand tools. He started pulling things out, laying them in rows on the ground. Practical things, useful things. He was already thinking ahead, already seeing weaknesses in his cabin defenses, gaps in his preparation, ways this place could fail. The problem was simple enough. His cabin was defensible. He was not sustainable. Food for maybe 3 days if he stretched it. Water, technically, he could manage if power held and the well kept running. But if anything failed, bottled water mattered. Medical supplies were almost non-existent. He had some bandages in the bathroom, old aspirin, rubbing alcohol, and not much else. Ammo was worse. If more infected reached the cabin, if even a handful came together, he could burn through what he had fast. He went back inside and spread the town map flat across the kitchen table. The road from his property cut south through the woods, joined a county route, then dropped into the small town of Mercer Hollow. Population barely above 2,000 on a good year. 1 traffic light, 1 gas station, a hardware store on Main, a pharmacy attached to the small clinic just off the square, a grocery store on the eastern edge of town. He stared at the circles he'd made in pencil. Hardware store, pharmacy, food store. 3 stops. Too many for 1 trip if the town was bad. Not enough if he left anything behind. He leaned over the table, hands braced against the wood, and tried to think like the kind of man he used to be before retreating from most of the world. Before the cabin. Before the silence. Practical, focused, direct. The world had changed overnight, but people wouldn't have changed immediately. They would have panicked, flooded stores, grabbed what they could, fought over what was left. Roads might be blocked. The infected would be concentrated where people had gathered. Noise would draw them. Gunshots even more. That meant stealth where possible, speed where necessary, violence only when there was no better option. He made a short list on a pad by the sink. Water, canned food, dry food, first aid, antibiotics if possible, painkillers, flashlights, batteries, nails, boards, fuel, ammo if luck allowed, bleach, duct tape, work gloves. He looked at the page, then at the truck keys in his hand. There was no version of this where he waited. Waiting was just starving with better scenery. By mid-morning, he was ready. He pulled on a heavy jacket over a dark thermal shirt and changed into thicker boots. A fixed blade knife went to his belt. The rifle rode in a sling across his back. The hatchet fit through a loop at his hip. Crowbar behind the truck seat. Rope, gas cans, and a pair of duffel bags in the bed. He added an old backpack for smaller items and tucked a flashlight into the side pocket. Before he left, he killed most of the breakers to conserve power, checked every barricade one more time, and stood for a final moment in the center of the cabin. It felt strange, leaving it, like stepping away from the only answer he had. He locked the door behind him, then got in the truck. The engine turned over with a low, dependable growl. Normal sound. Good sound. He backed down the dirt drive, tires crunching over gravel, and the cabin slipped behind the trees. As soon as the road swallowed him, the isolation that had once comforted him became something else. Exposure. The county route was empty for the first few miles. No cars, no people. Only long strips of road cutting through dark woods and occasional breaks in the trees where old fields opened under the pale sky. The world looked paused, suspended. as though everyone had simply stepped out of view for a minute. Then he passed the first abandoned vehicle. A sedan sat half in the ditch, driver's side door hanging open. There was blood on the inside of the window. Another mile on, a pickup had jackknifed against a guardrail. Then a minivan with both rear doors open and children's blankets scattered across the shoulder. Colton kept driving. He didn't slow. He didn't let himself imagine too much. By the time the first buildings of Mercer Hollow appeared through the trees, his jaw had set so tight it hurt. The town looked dead. Not ruined, not burning, not collapsed into total chaos. Just wrong. Main Street stretched ahead under an overcast sky lined with brick storefronts and old wooden facades. Parked cars sat at angles where they shouldn't. Some idled unattended, exhaust gone cold. One had crashed through the front of a barber shop. A newspaper box had been tipped onto its side, pages skittering loose across the pavement whenever the wind caught them. There were no crowds, no sirens, no voices. Only the occasional distant bang of something shifting somewhere out of sight. Colton slowed the truck and rolled through the center of town, eyes moving constantly. Mirrors, side streets, rooftops, doorways. Every shadow looked like a place something might step out from. The hardware store sat halfway down Main, its painted sign still swinging lightly above the sidewalk. Holloway Hardware. 2 of the front windows were broken. The parking spaces out front were empty except for a bicycle lying on its side and a shopping cart turned over near the curb. Colton drove past once instead of stopping immediately. Good call. At the far end of the block, movement crossed between 2 parked cars. A man in a stained white dress shirt staggered into the street, one sleeve torn off, forearm slick with dried blood. His face was so pale it looked dusted with ash. He swayed, then turned toward the sound of the truck. He didn't move at first. He listened. Then his whole body seemed to tighten at once. And he charged. Not a full sprint, not human smoothness, but fast enough to hit hard. Colton's eyes widened. Damn! He hit the gas and rolled past before the thing could reach the driver's side door. As he passed, he saw more movement down the side alley near the store. A woman in hospital scrubs dragging one leg. A teenage boy with most of his cheek gone. An older man leaning against a wall until the engine note pulled him upright like a string had been yanked. They weren't all the same. Some shambled, some turned quickly. Some seemed almost asleep until sound or motion snapped them awake. Mixed, evolving. The radio hadn't known enough to say that, but the woods had. Colton circled the block and parked behind the hardware store near a loading entrance. He killed the engine and sat very still, listening. Nothing close. The silence inside the cab pressed around him. He reached for the crowbar first. Better than a gun if things stayed quiet. Less noise, less attention. The rifle remained slung, ready if the quiet failed. The back door to the store stood slightly ajar. He approached it slowly, boots finding careful purchase in broken glass and damp cardboard. The alley smelled of rainwater, rotting produce from a nearby dumpster, and something sweeter underneath. Something spoiled. At the threshold, he paused and listened again. A faint, metallic ticking. Wind through a broken pane. No voices, no footsteps. He slipped inside. The hardware store was dim, lit only by weak daylight filtering through shattered front windows and a skylight streaked with grime. The place looked ransacked but not emptied. Aisles stood crooked where shelves had been shoved or climbed. Boxes had burst open on the floor. Bags of soil and concrete mix were split and spilled in gray drifts. A display of flashlights had been knocked over, batteries scattered among muddy footprints. Colton moved with the kind of care usually reserved for hunting. weight balanced, breath steady, eyes working ahead, then to the sides, then behind. He found a shopping cart and winced at the idea of using it. Too loud. Instead, he grabbed 2 contractor bags from a display near the entrance and slung them over his shoulder. He went first for what mattered most: nails. A whole case still sat under a half-collapsed shelf. He loaded boxes into the bags. Screws, heavy hinges, a padlock set, utility knives, work gloves, duct tape, zip ties, 2 hammers, 1 claw, 1 framing, a hatchet sharper than his own, a handsaw, flashlights, lantern fuel, batteries. His breathing slowed as routine took over. Find, judge, pack, move. In the plumbing aisle, he found water purification tablets near camping supplies. Lucky. He took them all. There were also collapsible jugs, a propane burner, and several canisters still untouched on a lower shelf. He added a pry bar heavier than the one in his truck. Then he reached the lumber section and stopped. Boards. Exactly what he needed. Exactly what he could not carry easily. He stood in the half-light and calculated distances. Truck to back door to lumber. Quick load. No engine running until he was ready to leave. Minimal noise. Fast hands. Doable. He had just turned toward the loading bay when he heard it. A wet, uneven scrape. Somewhere toward the front of the store. He froze. Another sound. Soft at first. Then the distinct click of something bumping lightly against metal shelving. Not alone. Colton lowered 1 bag quietly to the floor and eased the crowbar into both hands. The sound came again. Closer now, followed by a low throat noise that didn't sound like breath and didn't sound fully dead either. He moved sideways between aisles, using stacked paint cans as cover, angling for a line of sight. At the far end of the next row, something shifted into view. A woman, maybe 30. Her hair hung in clotted strands across her face. A dark bite ring showed through the torn collar of her sweatshirt. 1 hand trailed along the shelf, knocking small items off in slow taps as she drifted forward. Slow one. Her movements were jerky but aimless. Then one of the batteries under Colton's boot rolled slightly. A tiny sound. Almost nothing. The woman's head snapped toward him so violently her neck gave a sharp crack. For 1 impossible second, she stood perfectly still. Then she lunged down the aisle, fast. Colton braced and swung. The crowbar connected with the side of her skull in a brutal metallic thud. She slammed into the shelf instead of into him, sending boxes and hooks rattling to the floor. She twisted back toward him with frightening speed, 1 hand clawing for his jacket. He drove the crowbar forward into her face, shoved hard, then brought it down again with both hands. Bone gave. The body dropped. The noise echoed farther than he wanted. Damn it! He backed away, listening. At first, nothing. Then, from the front of the store came answering movement. More than one. He grabbed the bags and hurried toward the loading bay. Not running yet. Running made noise. Panic made mistakes. He reached the back just as something struck a shelf hard enough to topple it in the front section. Metal crashed. Glass shattered. No more stealth. Colton shoved through the loading door and broke into a sprint for the truck. He threw the bags into the bed, yanked the rear door open, and started hauling boards from a stack beside the store's exterior wall. Someone had left a shipment half unloaded there, wrapped in torn plastic. He got 6 long planks in before the first infected burst into the alley. The one in the white shirt. It came around the corner at a crooked run, 1 shoulder higher than the other, mouth open in a ragged snarl. Behind it came the woman in scrubs, dragging her damaged leg, but moving with terrifying determination anyway. Colton grabbed the rifle from the cab. The man in white hit the side of the truck and reached across the hood toward him. Colton fired once. The shot cracked down the alley like lightning. The man's head snapped back and his body dropped against the fender, sliding to the pavement. The woman kept coming. Colton stepped back, aimed lower this time through panic and bad angle, and hit her in the chest. It barely slowed her. She stumbled, shrieked, and lurched on. He fired again. Headshot. She folded instantly. The gunshot silence afterward lasted half a second. Then the town answered. Somewhere down Main, glass broke. Another scream rose, human or infected. Impossible to tell. From farther off came that same ugly chorus of sudden movement awakening all at once. Colton got in the truck and started it hard. As he pulled from the alley, 2 more infected crossed the street ahead, drawn by the sound. One was slow, meandering. The other darted from a storefront with animal quickness and slapped both hands onto the truck's passenger door as he swerved around it. Its face smeared blood across the glass before it fell away. He didn't stop until he reached the clinic. The pharmacy occupied the right side of a low brick building attached to Mercer Hollow Family Care. A white sign with a green cross hung above the entrance, untouched and absurdly calm. The parking lot was almost full, but most of the vehicles sat abandoned. A police cruiser idled crookedly against the curb with both front doors open. No officer in sight. This place felt worse the moment he saw it. Hospitals, clinics, pharmacies, sick people, injured people, crowds at the first sign of trouble. If the outbreak had reached town while people were rushing here for help, this building might be a nest. He parked farther away this time, half behind a landscaping island with dead winter shrubs. He shut off the engine and watched the front glass doors. Nothing moved inside, but one of the doors stood open about 6 inches, as if someone had gone in fast and never come back out. He stayed put long enough to hear the quiet. A wind gust rolled an abandoned receipt across the asphalt. Somewhere metal banged rhythmically, loose in the breeze. Then, very faintly, from inside the clinic, a moan. Not pained, hungry. Colton swallowed. "Need meds," he said to the empty cab. "In and out." He slung the backpack on and took the rifle this time. No point pretending quiet would save him if the building was already full. The automatic doors no longer had power. He slipped through the gap and entered a lobby washed in gray daylight and silence. The waiting room looked like panic frozen in place. Chairs overturned, magazines scattered, a coffee machine on its side beside a spreading stain, a child's pink sneaker near reception with no child attached. Behind the front desk, a computer screen had gone black mid-task. There was blood on the tile, not huge amounts. Smears, handprints, tracks. He followed them with his eyes toward the hall leading to exam rooms and the pharmacy counter beyond. The moan came again. Closer this time. He moved slowly through the lobby, boots whispering on tile. Every reflective surface made him jump a little. Every darkened doorway looked occupied. The pharmacy was behind a waist-high counter with plexiglass windows, one of them shattered inward. Shelves of medication rose behind it in neat rows, still mostly untouched. Relief hit him so suddenly it almost made him careless. He vaulted the side gate, opened drawers, and started loading the backpack. Bandages, gauze, adhesive tape, disinfectant, painkillers, cold packs, antibiotic ointment, prescription bottles he recognized by name, and many he didn't. He took broad-spectrum antibiotics when he found them, inhalers, antihistamines, burn cream, suture kits, electrolyte packets, thermometers, gloves, masks. His hands moved fast now, almost frantic with the knowledge that all of this mattered. Then, in the plexiglass reflection behind him, something shifted in the hallway. He turned. An old man in a hospital gown stood 20 feet away near the exam rooms, head tilted, bare feet streaked with blood. An IV line still dangled from one wrist. His face looked slack and sleepy. Slow one, Colton thought. Then the old man opened his mouth and gave a broken, rattling cry. Movement exploded in the hallway behind him. 2 nurses, one missing most of an ear, one with blood caked down the front of her scrubs. A teenage girl with a neck brace hanging loose and one eye clouded white. More shapes deeper in the corridor, waking, turning, colliding with walls as they pushed toward the sound. Nope. Colton snatched the backpack shut and grabbed a second plastic pharmacy tote from under the counter. He swept entire rows of supplies into it, not caring anymore what exactly went where. The old man reached the counter first, surprisingly fast in the final steps. He slammed into the plexiglass and clawed over the opening toward Colton's chest. Colton fired once. The shot shredded the silence and dropped the old man backward into the path of the others. But the others kept coming. The nearest nurse vaulted the fallen body with an agility that made Colton's stomach drop. She hit the counter hard enough to crack the remaining plexiglass, fingers swiping inches from his face. He drove the rifle butt into her nose. Bone crunched. She reeled but didn't stop. The second nurse was already reaching through the broken partition. Colton shoved the tote at her face, bought half a second, and vaulted back over the counter with the backpack still on. As his boots hit the floor, the teenage girl launched herself from the side hall with a speed that looked almost human. He barely got the rifle up in time. She hit the barrel, snapping it sideways, and both of them slammed into the waiting room chairs. Plastic shattered beneath them. Her teeth snapped shut inches from his throat. Her skin smelled sour and rotten. Colton jammed his forearm under her chin and fought for space, the world narrowing to grunts, scraping shoes, and the hot pulse of panic thundering in his ears. She was lighter than him but feral, all twitching strength and convulsive fury. He let go of the rifle with one hand, grabbed the knife at his belt, and drove it up into the underside of her jaw. The body seized, then dropped. He rolled free, gasping, and saw the nurses already crossing the room. No time to retrieve the rifle. He snatched the pharmacy tote, kicked open the front door wider, and ran for the truck. Behind him came the sounds of bodies slamming through the doorway, tripping over one another, then recovering. Halfway across the parking lot, a gunshot cracked from somewhere to his right. Not his. Human. The round punched sparks off a parked car several yards ahead. Colton dropped behind an SUV on instinct, tote clattering beside him. "Truck!" a voice shouted. Male, young, panicked or aggressive, hard to tell. "Leave the truck!" Colton peered beneath the SUV. 2 sets of boots moved between cars on the far side of the lot. People, alive. One of them fired again, this time toward the clinic entrance. "Forget him, man!" a second voice yelled. "The dead are coming out!" Colton risked a glance over the hood. 2 men in mismatched hunting gear were retreating toward a red pickup near the lot exit. One held a revolver, the other a shotgun. Both looked wired and exhausted, and both were staring at Colton's truck. Then the infected burst from the clinic doors behind him. The armed men saw them and made their decision instantly. The one with the revolver fired twice, dropped one nurse, missed the other, and sprinted for his pickup. The second man hesitated just long enough to point the shotgun vaguely in Colton's direction again, as if still considering the truck. Then the teenage infected body near the doors twitched, and more shapes crowded the clinic entry behind it. He ran too. Colton didn't waste the gift. He broke from cover, hit his truck, threw the tote into the passenger seat, and dove behind the wheel. The engine roared. He reversed hard, clipped a curb, and spun out just as the men in the red pickup fishtailed toward the lot exit. One of the infected nurses slammed both palms against his tailgate as he surged past, then disappeared beneath the rear view. The red pickup cut in front of him on the road and nearly caused a collision as both vehicles accelerated away from the clinic. For a moment, Colton thought the men might try to box him in or force him off the street. Instead, they blasted through the next intersection and vanished west. Cowards, maybe. Or just survivors making fast math. The grocery store sat on the eastern edge of town near the highway spur, a low concrete building with a huge front sign and a broad parking lot that was visible from too many angles. Colton almost drove past it. The 2 supply runs had already cost him ammo, time, and more luck than he liked admitting. But food was not optional. He turned in. The lot told the story before the building did. Cars abandoned mid-approach, a shopping cart corral overturned. Grocery bags split open across the asphalt, oranges and cereal boxes crushed into black tire marks. One car door stood open with dried blood sprayed across the inside panel. There were bodies too, some human dead, still and final, some not final at all. A woman in a winter coat crawled slowly between 2 sedans, one leg useless behind her. A heavy-set man in a store apron wandered near the cart return with half his scalp peeled back. Neither seemed aware of the truck at first. Then Colton's tires crunched over broken glass. The apron man stopped, turned, lifted his head, and started toward him. Inside the store, silhouettes moved behind the front windows. Too many to count from the glare. Colton parked near the garden's center side entrance, where fewer vehicles clustered and the glass was less exposed. He scanned the tree line beyond the lot, then the roof, then the far road. No movement from the men in the red pickup. Good. He took both the rifle and the crowbar, along with an empty duffel from the back seat. The side entrance had been smashed inward. He stepped through into the seasonal aisle, passing overturned bags of mulch and a rack of garden gloves swaying gently as if someone had just brushed by. The grocery store was dimmer than the others, lit only by emergency skylight and the weak haze through front windows. The smell hit him first. Rotting produce, spilled dairy, blood. A supermarket turned into something between a battlefield and a tomb. Announcements still played over the dead speaker system in chopped, broken fragments. Valued customers, static, cleanup needed, then silence again. Colton crouched behind a promotional display of canned soup and surveyed the main aisles. The place had been looted hard, but not cleanly. People had taken obvious things first and in panic. Bread shelves bare, bottled water mostly gone, chips exploded across the floor, frozen foods thawed into foul puddles. But deeper sections still held goods. Canned vegetables, dry beans, pasta, flour, pet food, cleaning supplies. Things no one grabbed while fighting over bottled water and fresh meat. 2 infected moved near the registers at the front. A cashier in a red vest, twitchy and fast-looking, and an elderly man who seemed to shuffle more than stalk. Farther back near produce, something knelt over a body and tore at it with ugly, wet sounds. Colton turned away from that and focused on the shelves. Move quiet. Fill fast. Leave. He started with canned food, beans, stew, tuna, fruit, soup, then dry goods, rice, pasta, oats, peanut butter, jerky, crackers, instant coffee, salt, sugar. He found a nearly untouched aisle of gallon water jugs where a toppled pallet had blocked easy access. Lucky again. He took 4, all he could carry with the duffel already growing heavy. His route took him through cleaning supplies, where he grabbed bleach, soap, trash bags, and paper towels. He almost smiled when he found batteries near the camping section. Then he heard voices. Alive. Male voices, low and urgent, somewhere near sporting goods at the back. Colton sank behind an end cap and listened. Said someone hit the pharmacy already. Doesn't matter, we need food and shells. Thought I heard a truck. A pause. Then another voice, rougher, older. If there's somebody in here, they're either useful or a problem. Colton peered around the shelving. 3 men moved through the back aisle with carts. Not the same 2 from the clinic lot. These were different. Heavier clothes. Better armed. One carried a pump shotgun. One had a baseball bat with electrical tape on the handle. The third had a pistol tucked visibly into his waistband and the calm posture of a man already enjoying the new rules. Looters, maybe survivors, maybe worse. At the front of their cart were cases of canned goods and bottled water. 1 cart already, working on a second. The older one glanced up, scanning the aisles with quick predator eyes. Colton pulled back out of sight. He had options. None good. Leave now and risk crossing open floor where the infected at the front might spot him. Stay hidden and wait for the men to pass, risking being boxed in. Or confront them before they found him first. His duffel shifted against a loose can and made a small clink. Tiny sound. But in the hush of the ruined store, it might as well have been a dinner bell. Back there, one of the men said sharply. Footsteps changed direction. Colton rose slowly from cover with the rifle up. The 3 men stopped in the aisle intersection 10 yards away. For half a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the older man's eyes flicked to Colton's bag, then to the rifle. Well, he said, there he is. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a gray beard and a denim jacket stained at one cuff. His voice was level, not frightened. That made him worse. We don't need trouble, Colton said. The man smiled without warmth. That's good, neither do we. Set your bag down and back off. One of the younger men with the bat snorted. The shotgun man kept his weapon low but ready. Colton held steady. Store's big enough? Not the point. The older man took 1 slow step forward. What matters now is what you can keep. Colton's jaw tightened. You try taking it. For a second, it looked like the older man might actually appreciate that answer. Then something crashed at the front of the store. All 4 men turned. The fast cashier infected had slammed into a checkout lane, triggered by the raised voices. The old shuffler beside him lifted his head. Near produce, the feeding thing straightened, face drenched dark, and began moving toward the sound too. The older man clicked his tongue in annoyance. You had to talk. And you had to threaten me. The shotgun man raised his weapon. Dale. Wait, the older man snapped. But the infected cashier was already sprinting. Not toward Colton. Toward all of them. Then others stirred. From behind customer service. From the stockroom door. From lanes beyond the registers where bodies had lain unnoticed among bags and toppled displays. The store was waking up, and it was going to wake up fast. Colton made his choice. He fired once at the sprinting cashier. The shot hit high, dropping it instantly, but the noise detonated through the building. Every infected in earshot reacted. The older man swore. Move! The aisle dissolved into chaos. The shotgun man fired twice into the oncoming crowd from the front and turned one head into mist, but more shapes flooded around fallen displays and checkout stands. The bat carrier swung wildly at a woman in a blood-soaked parka and got her teeth in his forearm for his trouble. He screamed and tried to yank free as she hung on. Colton backed away, dragging his duffel, and watched the older man make a brutal decision. He shoved the bitten man directly into the path of the infected and rammed his cart sideways to block the aisle. "Dale!" the younger man shrieked. The older man ignored him and drew his pistol, firing measured shots as he retreated. The bitten man went down under 3 bodies in a frenzy of limbs and snarls. Colton turned and ran. He cut through frozen foods, boots splashing through thawed puddles, nearly losing his footing on smashed peas and leaking ice cream. Behind him, gunshots hammered in uneven bursts, followed by screaming, then by a chorus of hungry, inhuman cries. He hit the side entrance and burst into daylight. One infected in the parking lot looked up from crawling near a bumper and began dragging itself toward him. Another emerged from behind the shopping cart corral at a stumbling run. Colton threw the duffel into the truck bed, swung into the cab, and started the engine just as the second infected reached the passenger side. Its hands slapped the window. Its mouth worked open and shut, teeth clicking. He floored it. The truck tore across the lot, clipped a stray cart, and shot for the exit. In the rearview mirror, the grocery store side doors burst open and 2 figures staggered out. One was infected. The other was the older man, Dale. Blood striped the side of his face, but he was very much alive and moving hard. He saw Colton's truck and actually smiled. Then he raised his pistol and fired. The rear windshield exploded in a burst of safety glass. Colton ducked instinctively as the truck swerved onto the road. Another shot rang out, but missed wide. Then the grocery store disappeared behind him. He drove east out of town too fast, tires whining on the turns, hands locked tight on the wheel. Broken glass glittered across the back seat. Cold air rushed through the fractured rear window and tore through the cab. Only when Mercer Hollow had shrunken his mirrors and the woods closed around the road again did he let himself breathe. 1 supply run, 3 stops, enough terror for a lifetime, and still not enough supplies. But he had food, water, medicine, tools, a chance. That should have felt like victory. Instead, all he could think about was what he'd seen. The mixed way the infected moved. Some slow, some fast, some triggered by sound, some seeming to stalk almost with intention. The way the town had fallen into silence while still being full of motion. The way living men had looked at him and seen inventory. By the time he turned onto his own dirt road, the pale day was already tipping toward late afternoon. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from another life. Solid, familiar, waiting. Colton parked hard outside and got out, rifle in hand, scanning instinctively before letting himself relax an inch. No movement in the clearing, no fresh tracks visible from here. Just the house, the woods, and the wind. He unloaded in 2 trips, stacking water by the kitchen wall, food on the table, medical gear in neat rows. He shut and barred the door, then stood in the middle of the room and looked at what he'd brought home. It was something. Not enough. Never enough now. As the light outside dimmed and the trees blackened into silhouette, he swept broken rear window glass from the truck seat with stiff, aching hands. He boarded over the missing section with plywood from the shed and extra screws from the hardware run. Darkness gathered faster than before, and with it came sound, far off at first. Then nearer, a cry in the woods, then another. Colton stopped working and listened. Not wolves, not deer, and not just one. He looked toward the tree line, where the first threads of night were stitching the forest closed. The town was 12 miles away, but the world between here and there was no longer empty. He tightened his grip on the drill and stared into the dark. Part 3 would begin with the first true night siege, Colton's deeper fortifications, and the realization that somebody may have followed him home. Part 3. The tree line. The first thing Colton noticed was how loud a drill sounded after the world ended. It whined through the clearing in a high mechanical shriek, biting through plywood and into the frame around the truck's rear window, while dusk thickened around him. Before all of this, the sound would have meant ordinary work. A repair, a project, another practical task on another self-contained day. Now every turn of the bit felt like lighting a flare. He drove the final screw home, released the trigger, and the sudden silence rushed back with enough force to make his ears ring. He stayed there with one hand on the plywood patch, head slightly bowed, listening into the darkening trees. Wind moved through the pines in long, dry breaths. Somewhere deeper in the woods, something cracked underfoot. Then nothing. Colton stepped away from the truck, grabbed the rifle from the front seat, and turned in a slow circle across the clearing. The cabin sat behind him with its windows boarded and its front porch swallowed by shadow. The shed stood off to the left, a darker block against the darker woods. Beyond the edge of the yard, the forest rose like a wall. It had always made him feel protected. Now it felt occupied. He backed toward the porch without taking his eyes off the tree line, climbed the steps, and slipped inside, locking the door behind him with quick, practiced hands. Once the bolt was thrown and the brace was set, he stood in the center of the room and let the air in the cabin settle around him. Wood smoke, coffee gone stale, sawdust, cold air bleeding in through places he had never noticed before. On the table, his supplies sat in rough, organized groups exactly where he had dropped them. Medicine in one cluster, canned food in another. Water jugs lined against the wall. Proof of effort. Proof that the run had mattered. But all he could see when he looked at them was the distance between some and enough. He set the rifle down within reach and started moving again. Action helped. Action narrowed the world into steps. He dragged a second bookshelf across the back door and wedged it tight. He measured 2 of the new boards against the kitchen windows and nailed them from the inside, layering wood over the already boarded glass to create thicker barriers at the most vulnerable points. He cut strips from an old blanket and stuffed them into the narrow seams under the doors to keep light from leaking out at night. He filled every available container in the cabin with water. Stock pots, pitchers, empty bottles, a wash basin, the coffee carafe. By the time he finished, the last of the natural light was gone. The cabin became a box of darkness and breath. He lit only one lantern and turned the flame low. Its weak amber glow touched the room in pieces. The edge of the table, the barrel of the rifle, the rough knots in the log walls. Everything outside the circle of light looked farther away than it really was. Colton stood near the radio on the porch table, now brought inside and set by the wall, and turned the dial carefully. Static. A burst of music from somewhere far off. More static. He adjusted it again. A voice surfaced for a moment, thin, strained, swallowed by interference. Shelter in place. Then gone. He tried several more frequencies with no better result. Whatever official voices remained in the world, they were either too far away to reach him or too buried in the storm of noise to matter. He shut the radio off. The silence after that felt personal. He opened the pharmacy tote and laid out the medical supplies with care. Gauze, tape, painkillers, disinfectant, antibiotics. The order of it calmed him. Things in rows. Things with purpose. Then he looked down at his own hands. A shallow cut ran across 2 knuckles on his right hand, probably from the broken clinic glass or a jagged shelf at the hardware store. He washed it, disinfected it, and wrapped it anyway. The radio voice from yesterday returned to him. Infection spreads through bites. It hadn't said whether blood contact mattered. It hadn't said how long a person had after a bite. It hadn't said why some of the infected moved like sleepwalkers and some like rabid dogs. Too much missing. He swallowed 2 painkillers dry, sat down at the table, and finally forced himself to eat. Cold beans from the can, a handful of crackers, water. He chewed without tasting anything. Outside, the woods settled into full night. Then the first impact came, a dull, heavy thump against one of the boards over the front window. Colton was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, rifle in hand, chair skidding backward across the floor. Another thump, lighter this time, then a dragging sound across the porch. He killed the lantern flame with a quick twist, and the cabin went black. For several seconds he could hear only his own breathing. Then came the scrape again, not from one place, from 2. One moving along the front wall, another circling the side of the house. Colton eased toward the front window and lowered himself enough to see through the small gap he had left between the planks. At first, there was only darkness and the faint silver wash of moonlight across the clearing. Then something passed through it. A shape, human height, bent slightly forward. It moved along the edge of the porch with an uneven glide, one hand trailing over the posts as if feeling its way. Another shape emerged beyond it, slower and more erratic, wandering just beyond the steps. He kept watching. A third came out of the trees. This one moved with purpose. It crossed open ground in a quick, low run, then stopped abruptly near the wood pile and turned its head toward the cabin. Colton's stomach tightened. They hadn't just blundered up onto the property. They had found it. The faster one crept toward the porch, body twitching in short bursts like a machine with failing gears. The slower 2 drifted in widening loops, bumping into the railing, circling back, drawn by some faint signal the cabin was giving off despite his efforts to hide it. He wondered if they could smell him. The thought sat cold in his chest. The fast one reached the door and went still. Its head lifted. Then it slammed itself into the wood hard enough to rattle the brace. Once, twice. A long, choking snarl spilled through the cracks. The slower ones reacted immediately, turning toward the sound and closing in. Colton backed up a step, sighted down the rifle, then stopped himself. Gunfire would kill these 3. It might also call 10 more. The thing hit the door again. The wood held, but the impact shuddered through the cabin all the way into the floorboards. From the side wall came another series of bumps, hands or shoulders striking the logs. Testing, pressing. A siege didn't need numbers to be frightening when it happened in the dark. He set the rifle down, took the hatchet instead, and moved to the kitchen. There, beneath the sink, was an old box of mason jars, half a bottle of dish soap, and a rag sack. He stood in the dark for 1 beat, mind racing. Noise draws them. Maybe noise moves them too. He worked by touch, filling a jar with screws and loose nails from the hardware store bag, sealing the lid tight. He moved to the back of the cabin, opened the small loft ladder hatch above the rear room, and climbed just enough to reach the narrow vent window he rarely used. It wasn't boarded. Too high and too small for anything human-sized to reach easily from outside. He cracked it open. Cold night air spilled in. The pounding at the front door continued, joined now by claws or fingernails scraping at the lower boards. Colton drew back his arm and hurled the jar as hard as he could into the woods behind the cabin. It sailed unseen into darkness. A second later, it shattered against stone or tree trunk with a burst of clanging glass and metal. Instant reaction. The pounding at the door stopped. From every side of the house came a flurry of movement. Footsteps, scraping, the sudden rustle of bodies changing direction. One of them gave a shrill, broken cry. Then the sounds pulled away. Not all at once. Not neatly, but enough. Colton held his breath, listening. A fast-moving shape rushed through the brush behind the cabin. Another crashed clumsily after it. For several seconds, the woods to the rear were full of twitching pursuit, and the front porch went quiet. He waited another full minute before easing back to the window gap. The porch was empty. The clearing was not. Two shapes still wandered at the edge of the yard, uncertain now, circling between the house and the direction of the thrown noise as if caught between urges. The fast one had vanished entirely into the trees. Good, he thought. Then a new sound reached him. Not from the infected. A metallic clink. Faint. Out by the truck. Colton's eyes snapped to the drive. At first he saw nothing. Then, in the moonlight, the shape of the truck resolved, and beside it, low and close to the passenger side, was a figure. Not shambling, not lurching, crouched, human. Colton's blood ran cold. The figure moved with deliberate care, one hand touching the truck's patched rear window, then the bed, then the door handle. Testing, searching. A second figure appeared near the front bumper, half hidden in shadow. People, alive, following him home. Colton pulled back from the window instinctively, heart hammering. For one ugly second, anger almost overran fear. Of course somebody had seen the truck leave town. Of course someone had watched which road he took, kept their distance, waited for dark. Dale. Could be him. Could be someone else. Didn't matter. The problem was the same. Outside were infected drawn to his property from somewhere in the dark. Somewhere beyond them, or among them, were living men scouting his cabin. He crouched in silence and thought fast. If he fired now, he might hit one of them through the boards or from the door if he opened it fast enough. But the shot would bring every infected in earshot straight onto the house. If he did nothing, the scouts would learn too much. Doors, windows, truck, layout. He needed to break their rhythm, make the infected and the intruders collide. Colton crawled to the opposite side of the front room and reached for the old emergency air horn he kept in a drawer by the wood stove. He had bought it years ago for bear country and never used it. He smiled once, humorless. Then he moved to the tiny side window facing the truck and the clearing beyond. He cracked the board gap just enough to slide the horn's mouthpiece near the opening. He hit it for one brutal blast. The sound was monstrous in the night, sharp, unnatural, impossible to ignore. Outside, both human figures jerked upright at once. Then the woods answered. From the left side of the clearing, 3 infected broke from the trees at a run. From behind the woodpile came another. The 2 slow wanderers near the edge of the yard snapped toward the blast and lurched forward with renewed purpose. One of the human figures shouted, "Move!" This time Colton recognized the voice. Dale. The older man darted away from the truck, pistol in hand, while his partner, someone thinner, younger, stumbled backward in surprise and nearly fell. The first fast infected hit him before he recovered, slamming into his chest and driving both of them to the ground. The scream that followed tore across the clearing. Dale fired twice, muzzle flashes strobing white between the trees. One infected dropped. Another flinched and kept coming. Colton watched through the narrow gap as order dissolved into flashes and shadows. Dale kicked free from a slow infected clawing at his leg, fired point blank into its face, then ran for the truck. Not Colton's. There was another vehicle now just visible under the trees off the drive, lights off, engine dark. They had parked well back and come in on foot. Smart, too smart. The younger man was still screaming on the ground under two infected. A third joined them. The sound changed quickly from panicked shouting to raw animal agony. Dale didn't go back. He sprinted into the tree line and vanished. Then silence began to spread again, broken only by feeding noises near the truck and one stray infected wandering in circles near the porch. Colton stayed where he was for a long time, the air horn still clenched in one hand. He had just survived the first test. Not of the infected, of the living. When he was sure no one else was moving in the clearing, he relit the lantern at the lowest possible flame and sat at the table with the rifle across his knees. Sleep, if it came at all, would come in snatches. It didn't. The rest of the night passed in fragments. A thump against the rear wall. A distant cry in the woods. The sound of something chewing outside, then dragging away. Once, around what he guessed was 3 in the morning, headlights flashed far off through the trees and were gone almost immediately. By dawn, his eyes felt filled with sand. Gray light seeped through the cracks in the boards. The clearing slowly reassembled itself from shadow. Colton approached the window and looked out. His truck was still there. So were the bodies. One lay near the front tire, stripped to a mangled shape that barely looked human anymore. The younger man. His jacket had been torn half off, and one arm was missing below the elbow. 10 yards away lay 2 infected, one face down in the grass, one draped over the woodpile where it must have collapsed after the feeding. There was no sign of Dale, no sign of the second vehicle either. He had gotten out. That mattered. Colton opened the door only after circling the cabin interior one last time and listening hard for movement outside. The morning air bit at his face, clean and sharp and horribly normal. He stepped off the porch with the rifle ready. The clearing smelled of blood and cold pine. Flies had already found the dead. He checked the infected first, putting a hatchet through both skulls to make certain. Then he approached the body near the truck. Younger than he'd looked in the dark. Late 20s maybe. Stubble, thin face, plain canvas coat with no identifying marks except a torn name patch on the inside pocket that read, Wyatt. One of the dead men from the grocery crew? No, different face, different build. Just another survivor who had made the wrong alliance. He searched the pockets. A folding knife, a flashlight, 2 protein bars, a box of 38 rounds, and in the inside jacket pocket, a wrinkled receipt from Mercer Hollow Market time-stamped yesterday afternoon. Followed him from town after all. Colton straightened slowly, the receipt in one hand. Dale had lost 1 man, maybe more if others were out there. He had also learned something valuable. Colton had supplies. Colton had a defensible home, and Colton was worth coming back for. The realization settled into him like a second spine. Hard, cold, useful. He couldn't just fortify the cabin now. He had to defend against people who could think. He dragged the bodies farther from the house and burned what he could in a pit beyond the shed, using scrap wood and a splash of fuel. It was ugly work. And slow. Smoke climbed into the pale morning sky in a dark, twisting column that he hated immediately. Visible, trackable, but leaving corpses close to the cabin was worse. By noon, he had moved on to the next layer of defense. He cut a stack of planks into angled spikes and began setting them under likely window approaches, hidden beneath brush and leaves where possible. He ran fishing line low between two trees near the drive and hung empty cans from it as a crude alarm. He dragged old deadfall logs into staggered barricades near the easiest path vehicles might use to rush the clearing. Not enough to stop a determined truck. Enough to slow one, enough to make noise. Then he climbed the cabin roof. From there, he could see farther through the breaks in the trees, especially toward the dirt road winding back out to the county route. The wind was stronger up here, cold enough to sting the eyes. He shaded them with one hand and studied the land. For a while, nothing moved. Then, far beyond the first bend in the drive, a flicker of reflected sunlight winked through the trees. Glass, a windshield maybe, gone as quickly as it appeared. He lowered himself carefully behind the ridgeline and stayed still. A vehicle could be sitting out there watching, or passing, or he could have imagined it. Sun through branches did tricks to the eye, but he didn't think so. He climbed down, went inside, and reopened the map. Mercer Hollow was no longer just a supply point. It was the nearest concentration of infected scavengers and desperate people. A source of danger that would keep bleeding outward as food thinned and fear sharpened. If Dale had a group, they might have another location. A house, a farm, a garage. Somewhere they were staging from. Somewhere close enough to shadow supply runs and far enough not to be overrun yet. The cabin might not remain hidden no matter what he built. That thought should have pushed him toward one obvious answer. Leave. Pack what he had. Go deeper into the wilderness. Find some farther place. But he looked around the cabin. The sturdy walls, the wood stove, the well, the 50 acres he knew trail by trail, and felt the refusal rise up hard in him. No, he had chosen this place, worked for it, built it with his own hands. He wasn't leaving because the world had gone insane. He just needed to stop thinking like a man hiding in a cabin and start thinking like the last man in a fortress. That afternoon, he inventoried weapons properly. Rifle and remaining rounds, hatchet, kitchen knives, pry bar, splitting maul, a short length of chain, hammer, nails, one box of .38 ammunition he couldn't use unless he found a revolver. He cleaned the rifle on the kitchen table with slow precision and counted each cartridge twice. Not enough. Ammo remained the glaring hole. He had skipped the sporting goods section in the grocery store because of the men there. There might be shells, handgun rounds, maybe even another firearm still in town. There could also be more supplies in houses on the outskirts, vehicles, storage sheds. He hated the thought of going back so soon. The town had teeth now, and yet every problem seemed to point there. Toward risk, toward more, toward the place where everything had broken. Near sunset, while checking his new alarm line at the drive, he found tracks in the mud. Fresh, not many. One person, maybe two. Boots, human, not shambling, not random. Watching distance, then retreating. Dale had come back, or never really left. Colton followed the prints as far as he dared, rifle up, moving through the trees in a crouch until they crossed stony ground and disappeared among pine needles. He stopped there and listened. The woods gave him nothing. No birdsong, no voices, just wind. When he returned to the clearing, the cabin looked smaller somehow. Strong, yes, but no longer untouched, no longer separate from what was spreading across the world beyond the tree line. He stood on the porch as evening gathered, eyes fixed on the dark between the trunks, and understood something with absolute clarity. The infected were one disaster, people were another. The infected wanted to tear him open because they were empty. The living wanted to tear him open because he had something left. Inside, the radio suddenly crackled to life on its own. Colton turned sharply and went in, shutting the door behind him. Static flooded the room. Then a voice surfaced through the interference, faint, broken, but real. To any survivors monitoring emergency frequencies, avoid Route 16 through Mercer Hollow. Repeat, avoid Route 16 through Mercer Hollow. Large concentrations reported. Quarantine failed. National Guard units have withdrawn south. Do not travel toward town limits after dark. Reports of organized armed groups intercepting vehicles on county roads. If you can hear this, shelter, conserve, and... A burst of static swallowed the rest. Colton stared at the radio. Then he reached out and turned the volume slightly higher, waiting for the signal to come back. Outside, night sealed the trees once more. And somewhere in those woods, someone was still watching his cabin. The radio did not speak again that night. After the warning about Route 16, it returned to static and stayed there, hissing softly in the corner like a dying thing too stubborn to quit. Colton left it on low while he worked, half hoping another voice would cut through, half dreading what it might say if one did. The message had confirmed what he already knew in his bones. Mercer Hollow was lost, the roads were dangerous, and men with guns had started organizing around the collapse. That meant the window for scavenging cleanly was closing. Whatever remained in town would soon be contested, stripped, or buried under the dead. Colton stood over the map again with a pencil in his hand and made himself think past fear. Main Street was too exposed now. The clinic and grocery store had already gone loud. Dale or someone like him might be watching the obvious roads, waiting for anyone desperate enough to make another run. But towns bled outward in layers. On the edges there were houses, workshops, garages, outbuildings, maybe a hunting supply shed, maybe a sheriff's deputy's cruiser abandoned with ammunition still inside. Maybe a farm with canned goods and fuel. He marked a loop east of Mercer Hollow, skirting the main road and cutting behind a cluster of houses near the old feed mill. Farther south sat a volunteer fire station and, beyond it, a sporting goods warehouse attached to a bait shop that mostly served hunters and fishermen in season. Small place, easy to miss, easy to overlook and panic. That was the target. Food he now had some of. Medicine, enough for the moment. Ammo, still not enough. And if the living were going to start treating his cabin like a prize, he needed the means to hold it. By dawn, he was ready again. This time, the truck stayed hidden behind the shed under a net of old canvas and pine boughs. Too visible, too memorable. Instead, he took the ATV he used for hauling cut wood around the property. Smaller engine, narrower track, easier to conceal if he had to leave it and go on foot. He loaded lightly. Rifle, hatchet, crowbar, backpack, a jerry can, one water bottle, a coil of rope, and the revolver rounds from Wyatt's coat, even though he still had no revolver to feed them to. The sky was iron gray, the air damp with the threat of rain. Before leaving, he checked the alarm lines one last time. Nothing fresh. That bothered him more than tracks would have. People who were watching and learning would avoid his obvious defenses. He headed out through the backside of his acreage, following old deer trails and logging cuts that eventually joined a disused service road running parallel to the county route. The ATV bumped and growled under him, softer than the truck, but still loud enough to make him wince whenever he passed through tighter stands of timber. Twice he killed the engine and listened. Twice the woods answered only with wind and the distant creak of branches. Near the edge of Mercer Hollow's outer farms, he hid the ATV in a collapsed equipment lean-to and continued on foot. The change in scale made everything feel sharper. Without the truck around him, every broken fence, every open gate, Every shape in a window seemed close enough to reach. He moved through wet grass and mud behind a row of unkempt hedges, approaching the first house on the outskirts from the rear. A white farmhouse sat quiet beneath bare-limbed trees. One upstairs window was broken. The back door stood open just a crack. Chickens wandered loose in the yard, pecking at nothing, ownerless. Colton crouched behind a woodpile and watched. No movement inside, no sound except the chickens and the low moan of wind through the broken upstairs pane. He slipped to the mudroom door and pushed it open with a crowbar. The house smelled sour and abandoned. Laundry detergent, damp wood, something spoiled in the kitchen. He cleared it room by room with the rifle raised, pulse thudding high in his throat. Mudroom, kitchen, hall, living room, empty. Signs of hurried departure were everywhere. An overturned chair, a purse dumped on the floor, a family photo face down near the stairs. On the table sat a half-finished grocery list written in blue ink. Milk, dog food, light bulbs, Tylenol. The ordinary cruelty of it nearly stopped him. He searched quickly. The pantry gave him canned vegetables, jars of peaches, flour, and coffee. The bathroom gave bandages, hydrogen peroxide, and aspirin. In the utility room, he found a propane camping stove and 3 canisters. Then, in the coat closet by the front door, he found what made the trip worth the risk. A locked gun case. He stared at it for one taut second, then jammed the crowbar beneath the latch and pried until the cheap metal gave way. Inside lay a pump-action shotgun, a box of 12-gauge shells, and an old .38 revolver wrapped in an oilcloth rag. Colton let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty house. The revolver was worn but clean. 6-shot, heavy in the hand. He checked the cylinder, loaded it with Wyatt's rounds, and slid it into the back of his belt. He took all the shells, the shotgun, and the rest of the ammunition from the case. 2 rounds too, though he had nothing for them. Trade value maybe later, if later ever existed again. As he stepped back into the kitchen, a sound reached him from the road. Engine. He froze and moved to the side window. Through the lace curtain, he saw a dark pickup roll slowly past the house. Dale's truck. He recognized the dented rear quarter panel from the grocery lot. The same red pickup now streaked with mud and something darker near the bumper. It was moving too slowly to be casual. Hunting pace. Colton stayed low as it idled to the next property. 2 men inside, Dale at the wheel, someone else in the passenger seat. The truck stopped. The passenger climbed out with a rifle and went to check the garage while Dale remained in the cab, scanning. They were working the outskirts house to house, maybe looking for supplies, maybe looking for him. Colton backed away from the window and out the mudroom, taking the rear route through the yard and into the field behind the house. He kept low, moving along the hedgerow with a backpack now much heavier. Rain began to spit from the gray sky in cold, thin drops. He angled toward the old feed mill, using the long shape of the building as cover. The mill had been abandoned for years, its rusted siding rattling whenever the wind hit it right. Beyond it, half hidden by pines, stood the bait shop and attached sporting goods warehouse he had marked on the map. The parking lot was nearly empty, a good sign, or a terrible one. He approached from the rear loading side and found the chain-link gate half open. No vehicle tracks fresh enough to stand out in the damp gravel. The back door was shut but not locked. Inside, the warehouse was dark and smelled of dust, rubber, and stale bait. Shelves held fishing line, tackle boxes, rain gear, coolers, and camping supplies. Farther in, behind a counter partition, a rack of hunting knives gleamed faintly in the murk, and on the left wall, caged behind locked wire mesh, hung ammunition. His pulse kicked. "Come on," he said under his breath. The cage door was padlocked, heavier than the gun case latch but mounted into rotten wood. He set the shotgun down, wedged the crowbar between mesh and frame, and leaned his weight into it. The wood splintered. One more hard jerk and the staple tore free. Inside the cage were boxes of shells, rifle rounds, handgun ammo, and cleaning kits. Not a fortune, not enough for an army, but enough for one man to stop feeling naked. He loaded the backpack until it strained at the seams. Shells, 38, 30-06 for his rifle, a bandolier, gun oil, a compact pair of binoculars, water purification filters, a hunting vest with deep pockets. Then he heard footsteps, not outside, inside the store. Colton killed his breathing and listened. One set, then two. Soft, measured, human. Voices followed, muffled by shelving. "Told you somebody hit this place already." "Look at the cage." Dale. Close now. Colton's eyes flicked around the dim warehouse. One rear door. One side hallway. Stacks of feed sacks and camping coolers. Not many places to vanish with a full pack and a shotgun. He moved behind a tall display of kayaks, standing on edge and crouched there, revolver in one hand, shotgun within reach. The footsteps drew nearer. A second voice, lower and younger than Dale's, said, "Maybe they're still here." "They are," Dale answered calmly. "People in a hurry leave signs, broken staples fresh." The footsteps stopped. Silence. Colton knew the trick. Make the other man feel discovered. Make him shift. Make him breathe too loud. He stayed still. Rain drummed lightly on the roof overhead. Then, from the front of the store, came a new sound. A long, wet groan. All three men froze. Another groan answered it from outside. Then something struck the front glass hard. Once. Then again. Dale swore softly. "Back way, now." The younger man moved first, boots crunching over loose gravel tracked into the store. He appeared at the end of the aisle 20 feet away, rifle half raised, eyes sweeping the dim warehouse. He was lean, bearded, tense. Colton fired the revolver before the man spotted him fully. The shot thundered in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the man high in the shoulder and spun him into the shelf. Boxes of bait and line burst down around him. He cried out and dropped the rifle. Dale fired back instantly from somewhere beyond the counter. The round smacked into the kayak display, inches above Colton's head, showering him with plastic splinters. Outside, the infected reacted to the gunfire with sudden fury. The front glass shattered. Bodies came through. Colton grabbed the shotgun, slung the backpack, and sprinted for the rear door as the warehouse erupted into shouts, gunshots, and the crashing chaos of the dead hitting shelving and counters. He burst into the rain behind the building and cut left along the loading ramp. Dale emerged from a side door a second later, pistol in hand, face hard with concentration. He saw Colton and actually laughed once, short and sharp. "You're getting real expensive," he called. Colton didn't answer. He fired the shotgun. At that range, the blast shredded the ramp railing beside Dale instead of Dale himself, spraying him with splinters and forcing him back. Dale stumbled, lost his footing on the wet boards, and dropped hard to one knee. His pistol skidded away. Colton could have run. He knew he should run. But Dale was the sort of man who stayed a problem until somebody ended him. Dale rose with a hunting knife in his hand, blood running from a cut across his brow, rain streaking his beard dark. He came forward like he meant it. Then the infected from the front of the shop rounded the building. 3 of them. a slow woman in a yellow raincoat, a teenage boy moving in violent bursts, and behind them, something older, broader, with half its face gone and its arms pumping hard at its sides. They saw motion and charged. Dale turned just enough to understand, not enough to escape. The teenage boy hit him first from the side, latching onto his arm. Dale buried the knife in its neck, but the broader infected slammed into his chest and drove him backward off the loading ramp into the mud. The slow woman came after, clawing and biting. Dale screamed once, furious more than afraid, trying to stab, shove, rise. Colton stood in the rain with a shotgun aimed and watched for a heartbeat too long. He could kill them all from here, maybe, or miss one, or be right beside them when more came. Dale's eyes found his over the shoulder of the thing tearing at him. There was no plea in them, only hate. The world made the choice for Colton. More shapes were moving near the front lot now, drawn by the noise. He turned and ran. He didn't stop until he reached the ATV. By then the rain had strengthened into a cold, steady fall, flattening grass and washing tracks into soft blurs. He strapped the bulging backpack to the rear rack, slung the shotgun across his back, and kicked the ATV to life. As he pulled away through the trees, he glanced back only once. No one followed. No truck engine started. Nothing but rain and the distant fading cries of the dead. By the time Colton reached his property, afternoon had collapsed toward evening and the weather had turned raw. Mist clung low between the pines. The clearing looked washed out and strangely pale under the rain. He rolled the ATV behind the shed and began unloading under cover. Ammo first. Always ammo now. He carried the backpack into the cabin, set it on the table, and started sorting with shaking, exhausted hands. Boxes of shells, rifle cartridges, revolver rounds, filters, tools, vest, stove fuel, knives, enough supplies to matter, enough to change the shape of his chances. For the first time since the broadcast, he felt something close to momentum. Then he noticed the door. The back door brace was slightly out of line, not broken, moved. Just enough to matter. Colton went still. Every sound in the cabin seemed suddenly too loud. The rain on the roof, the tick of cooling metal from the stove, the faint buzz of the radio static. Someone had been here. He drew the revolver and backed toward the wall, listening. Nothing. He checked the front room, then the loft, then the bathroom. Every angle careful, breath held. Empty. But on the kitchen table, beside the boxes of ammo he had just laid out, sat something that had not been there before. A single playing card. King of Diamonds. On the back, written in blocky black marker, "Next time we take the cabin." Colton stared at it. Rainwater still dripping from his jacket, hem onto the floorboards. Dale's people. Not Dale himself, most likely. Somebody who knew the routine, knew the roads, maybe knew where he was today. Somebody who had come in while he was gone, bypassed his alarms or found where they were weak, and left alive on purpose. A message. A promise. His jaw tightened until it hurt. "No," he said softly into the empty room. Then louder. "No." That evening he changed the cabin for good. The work went past practical and into war. He stretched more lines through the trees. Not just alarms now, but guides for improvised traps. He buried sharpened stakes along the narrowest approach and masked them with leaves and wet brush. He wired the truck's battery to floodlights salvaged from the shed and mounted them on the cabin corners so he could blast the clearing white in an instant if night attackers came. He moved the truck itself sideways across part of the drive as a barrier and chained the wheels to a stump. He carried every remaining board to the windows and reinforced the inside walls at shoulder height with shelves filled by books, canned food, and toolboxes to slow bullets if bullets started coming through. At dusk, he climbed to the roof with the binoculars from the sporting goods warehouse and watched the dark settle through the rain. Nothing moved, no headlights, no silhouettes, and that silence worried him more than anything had yet. Because silence meant planning. The attack came after midnight. It began with the alarm cans at the drive, a metallic rattle, then another, then the unmistakable snap of one line being cut. Colton was awake before the second sound fully reached him. He rolled from the chair where he had been dozing in boots and jacket, grabbed the rifle, and crossed to the switch near the door. The floodlights exploded on. White light flooded the clearing so hard it looked unreal, like day torn open all at once. Rain turned to silver needles. Every tree cast a sharp black shadows. And there they were. 4 men in the clearing. 2 near the drive with bolt cutters and rifles. 1 crouched near the woodpile. And 1 already halfway to the porch, moving fast through the rain with a shotgun in both hands. Not scavengers now. A raid. The porch man blinked in the sudden light and raised his weapon. Colton fired first. The rifle cracked through the cabin and punched the man backward off the steps. Shouts erupted outside. One of the men by the drive fired into the front wall, splintering wood beside the window. Another ran for cover behind the truck. Then came the second wave. The gunshots brought the infected. At the edge of the clearing, shapes burst from the trees. First 2, then 5, then more. Some came shambling, heads swinging in confusion under the lights. Others ran low and vicious, drawn by sound and movement like hunting dogs. One of the raiders turned and screamed, "Dead! Dead in the trees!" No one was in charge now. Colton cycled the rifle and shot the man near the truck through the chest as he tried to reposition. The man spun, hit the tailgate, and slid down. Outside, the first fast infected reached the drive and slammed into one of the riflemen, taking him to the mud in a tangle of limbs. Gunfire strobed through the rain. The clearing became madness. A raider emptied half a magazine at the infected, charging him, and dropped 3 before the 4th got his throat. Another tried to retreat toward the trees and hit one of Colton's buried stakes. He went down screaming as 2 slow infected swarmed over him. The man by the woodpile, smarter than the rest, did not fire at once. He moved low, using chaos as cover, angling for the side of the cabin. Colton saw him too late. The side window exploded inward under a shotgun blast. Pellets tore through shelves and punched the wall by the stove. Colton dropped behind the table as another blast followed, lower this time, shredding the lower boards. The man outside shouted, "Come out!" Colton answered by killing the floodlights. Darkness slammed back into the clearing. Outside, confusion peaked instantly. Raiders cursed. Infected shrieked. Someone stumbled into the truck chain and fell with a metallic crash. Colton moved in the dark he knew better than any of them. He slipped to the side hall, unbarred the rear loft hatch, and climbed fast into the crawl space above the back room. From there, he reached the vent window, eased it open, and got onto the roof as rain soaked him through in seconds. Below, shapes moved in fragments under muzzle flashes and moonlight. The side attacker was close to the broken window, trying to see in. An infected lurched toward him from the shed side. Colton drew the revolver and fired once down into the attacker's back. The man folded without a sound. The infected fell on him immediately. At the front of the cabin, one surviving raider was trying to drag another toward the drive while 2 infected pursued. Colton recognized the rescuer by build before he saw the face. Dale's younger man from the warehouse, the one he had shot in the shoulder, still alive, arm bound in a dark sling under his jacket. He looked up, saw Colton on the roof, and raised a pistol with his good hand. Colton fired first again. The revolver bucked. The younger man dropped. Then the infected reached him too. After that, the clearing belonged to the dead. Colton stayed on the roof through the rest of the night while rain washed blood into the mud below, and the last of the living either died or fled. Twice infected tried the porch. Once, one climbed onto the hood of the truck and slipped off. Several wandered under the roofline long enough for Colton to put careful rifle shots into their heads. By dawn, the raid had burned itself out. The storm moved east. A white fog rose from the soaked ground. The clearing looked like a battlefield at the edge of a nightmare. Bodies lay scattered between trees, traps, and torn-up earth. Men and infected together, hard to tell apart at a distance until you came close enough to see the faces. The truck was pocked with bullet holes. One front floodlight hung broken by its wire. The side window had been blasted open, boards splintered inward. But the cabin still stood. Colton climbed down stiff and freezing and moved among the dead with methodical caution, finishing the infected first, one by one. No risks, no assumptions. He counted 7 raiders total. He did not find Dale among them. That fact settled in him like a thorn. Maybe Dale had died at the sporting goods warehouse. Maybe he had never led this raid personally. Maybe he had, and escaped in the dark. Either way, the threat of people would not end here. Nothing ended neatly anymore. By noon, he had dragged the bodies beyond the far tree line and set a fire pit large enough to deal with what remained. Smoke climbed again, black and ugly, but he no longer cared who saw it. Let them see. Let them think the cabin costly. When the work was done, he stood alone in the clearing with ash drifting around him and looked at the land that had once meant solitude and now meant survival. The place had changed. So had he. The old version of Colton Clay might have thought surviving meant holding still long enough for the storm to pass. He understood now that there was no passing storm. There was only the world as it had become. The dead in the trees, the hungry on the roads, the silence between radio calls. He spent the next 2 days repairing what mattered and abandoning what did not. The side window was boarded thicker than before. The drive was narrowed more aggressively with logs and scrap. The floodlights were rebuilt, one stronger, one weaker. He moved the ATV to a second hidden cache deeper in the woods along with food, water, a bedroll, and spare ammo in case the cabin ever truly fell. Not surrender. Redundancy. He began mapping the forest around him not as property, but as territory. Observation points, fallback routes, kill zones. He hunted quietly for fresh meat and found none, as if the animals had already learned to avoid human disaster. He checked the radio each evening, sometimes static, sometimes broken instructions. Once, a chaplain's voice reading names until the signal died. A week after the raid, on a cold, clear morning, Colton climbed to the roof with the binoculars and looked out over 50 acres of pine and stone washed clean by weather. Beyond the distant ridges, a thin column of smoke rose from somewhere near Mercer Hollow. Not random smoke. Too steady. Too controlled. Someone was still there. Maybe a camp. Maybe the dead burning in piles. Maybe the last ugly piece of Dale's world hanging on. Colton lowered the binoculars and let the wind hit his face. He was still alone, but it no longer felt like the same kind of loneliness. Not empty, sharp, useful. The cabin behind him was scarred and stubborn. The land around it had teeth now. Supplies were stacked in deeper rows. Weapons cleaned and loaded, water stored, food rationed, plans made. He had started this nightmare as a man caught off guard in a good location with almost nothing else. Now he was something harder. Not safe, never safe, but ready. That evening, just after sunset, the radio cracked alive with a stronger signal than any he had heard yet. This is a civil defense relay for any survivors in the northern counties. Avoid population centers. Avoid state roads after dark. Isolated shelters remain your best chance. Do not trust unverified armed groups offering transport or protection. Repeat, do not trust. The signal wavered but held. Colton sat at the table, revolver beside one hand, rifle beside the other, and listened to every word. Outside, the pines whispered under the coming night. Far off, beyond the last line of trees, something cried out once and was answered by another voice deeper in the dark. Colton looked toward the window boards, toward the unseen woods, and then at the supplies stacked around the room. He reached over, turned the radio volume slightly higher, and began loading fresh shells into the shotgun one by one. The dead were still out there, so were the living. And tomorrow would come whether the world deserved it or not. When it did, Colton Clay would still be here, not waiting, watching.